Aldous Huxley writes in Brave New World, words can be like x rays if you use them properly. They'll go through anything. You read and you're pierced. The same can be said about movies, although there are very few movies every year that have this X ray piercing ability, the ability to enhance your understanding of yourself and those around you. The Banshees of Inisherin is one of these rare movies. Martin McDonagh has never made a bad film, and a big part of his successful history is his ability to strike a dark comedic tone that doesn't drown out the deeper themes of the story. His characters make you laugh 1 minute, and then a few scenes later, you're deeply considering their choices and how they compare to your own. For example, the orange juice scene in Three Billboards stuck in my mind for weeks after I first saw it.
Sorry for what? Throwing you out the window.
But as much as I enjoy McDonagh's first three movies, I think Banshees of Inisherin is his best work yet. I had the pleasure of watching its North American debut at Toronto Film Festival, and I knew immediately after I left the theater that it would be the standout movie of 2022. And that was after watching movies like All Quiet on the Western Front and The Fablemans, which I expect will win Best Picture. The multi-layered characters and their relationships are what make Banshee special. I know every character in this movie, I felt like every character at one point or another, and I'm going to talk about them at length. But I want to briefly mention the structural brilliance of McDonagh's film. Banshees is a simple movie. The story is little more than a platonic breakup, and it doesn't waste any time getting into the central conflict. In the very first minute of the movie, Podrick goes to Colm's house and is rejected for an afternoon pint. I think many writers would have been tempted to establish the environment and some backstory for the central characters, but McDonagh throws us right into the action, which creates a great tempo for the entire movie. I also appreciate how Banshees isn't broken into chapters. The story has fable like qualities that invite that structural gimmick, but keeping it simple was the right choice. Modern movies way overuse that tool, it's one of my biggest pet peeves nowadays. Now, the first place to start when discussing the themes of the Banshees of Inisherin is the setting. The story takes place in 1923 during the Irish Civil War, and this backdrop is used as a metaphor for the conflict between Colm and Podrick. Yesterday they were on the same side, and the next day they're not. The conflict is also relevant given Colm's existential dilemma. He's on an island where nothing happens, but a major event in Irish history is happening just a few miles away. He's looking from the outside at something terrible, yes, but also historically significant. Looking in from the outside is a constant image in Banshees. It's easy to lose count of how many shots there are of characters peering into windows. Along with the religious symbols, it's the most common visual motif of the movie. Fundamentally, the movie is about how people behave when they feel like an outsider. Podrick is content with his simple life on Inisherin, but when Colm abandons their friendship, he feels isolated. His only companion becomes Dominic, the strangest person in town, who's desperate for love that will never find him. And both characters are not shy about their frustration. Then there's Siobhan, who I think is the most interesting character. Like her brother and Dominic, she's desperate for companionship, but conceals that truth. The people of the island know her as the assertive older sister who doesn't go out that much, and that's it. That's the image she has. Only Colm recognizes that behind that perception, she's a sensitive woman who's running low on hope. Colm sees her pain because he feels something very similar. Unlike the other three main characters, Colm is widely admired on the island, people are desperate for his attention, but despite that, he feels like an outsider to the life he desires. He doesn't want to shoot the breeze with Podrick about horseshit, he wants to leave a legacy, he wants his name to live on. And the story is built around his decision to pursue that desire. When it comes to Colm's decision, the conversation could easily be monopolized by the question of legacy versus morality. And this same debate happens in Whiplash, with Neiman playing the role of Colm.
It's not exactly my idea of success.
I'd rather die drunk, broke at 34 and have people at a dinner table talk about me than live to be rich and sober at 90 and nobody remember who I was.
So the argument is, nobody's remembered for just being a good person. So there's limited value in being nice and compassionate. Better to be despised while you're alive, but remembered when you're gone. Podrick's drunken response is brilliant. He tells Colm that he will always remember the kindness of his parents and his sister, and it's really touching the following day to hear Siobhan happily recount his rebuttal, given how the other people on the island perceive her. Their sibling relationship is probably the most interesting I've seen since Hell or High Water, complete opposite ends of the spectrum, but they both feel incredibly authentic. I think the conversation eventually becomes theological and whether you believe our actions have eternal meaning or not, a debate that will go on until the end of time. But Colm's choice also asks questions about responsibility, which was my most important takeaway. It's better to be humble than self centered, obviously, especially when it comes to friends and family. You shouldn't want to be the family member or friend that is completely undependable and incapable of having important conversations. But the relationships that Podrick has with Colm and Siobhan examine how you find a balance between what's good for others and what's good for yourself. Podrick's life would be better with Colm and his sister in the picture. In fact, he collapses fairly quickly, psychologically and morally, when they leave. So, does that mean what Colm and Siobhan did was wrong? As a friend and as a sibling, did they have a responsibility to be present for Podrick's well being? It's easier to defend Siobhan's departure despite having more responsibility to Podrick as his sister. She loves her brother a lot and tries her best to make his dilemma with Colm easier. That isn't something she has to do because he is an adult, but you can tell she wants to ease his burden any way she can. She does all of this in spite of her own unhappiness and loneliness, which is a testament to her love because most people in that situation would unleash their frustrations on whoever's closest. And it's also worth mentioning the wardrobe chosen for Siobhan because it connects to this conversation. Colum's house has very distinct colors. It has a red door and a yellow interior. Siobhan's two jackets are also yellow and red. I believe the colors represent the two potential outcomes for both characters, red being anxiety and possibly death, the suicidal imagery in Colum's house would support that, and yellow is hope and optimism. Siobhan wears a yellow jacket during her departure. When she gets the chance to leave, it's a now or never decision, maybe even a life or death decision, and she rightly does what's best for her, even though Podrick is not in a stable place when she leaves. She had nothing to prove. She was a decent, caring person who needed a fresh start at almost any cost. Colm's decision to divorce himself from Podrick is trickier to judge. Compared to Siobhan, it can come off as somewhat conceited. He's depressed, he wants to spend his time more productively, but he continues to talk with other people in the pub. So why can't he just spend a little time with Podrick talking about mundane stuff? It doesn't seem like too much to ask. Podrick's reaction does devolve into insanity, especially once the fingers start coming off. You just want him to leave the man alone. But imagine seeing your best friend having a chat with the policeman who abuses his son, but not you. That could drive someone mad. I think a part of Colm's initial cruelty is just an attempt to rip off the bandage, so to speak, but I also believe that Podrick sort of becomes a representation of his wasted life, and that Colm places some of his frustrations on him as a result, which again is something that Siobhan does not do. The question for the audience is, how do you know when hurting someone to do something you think will improve your own life is justifiable? If your friend's car breaks down and needs a ride, it'd be wrong to say, well, I haven't had dinner yet, call someone else. But if you're driving to a job interview and get the same request, you probably shouldn't be expected to abandon the job. We have a responsibility to our friends and family, but also ourselves. And finding the right balance can be very hard, especially when the choices are as big as they are for Siobhan and involve people we care about. Having the right motivations is important, and I believe we usually can sense what our true motivations are, but it isn't always enough to prevent bad outcomes. The thematic brilliance doesn't end with a responsibility balance. Just like McDonough's previous film, Banshees touches on when we should let things go and when we shouldn't. Podrick's final conclusion is, some things there is no moving on from, and that's a good thing. In other words, sometimes people make unforgivable choices that necessitate a response, choices that can't be lessened by time. An entire separate video could be made on that statement. Brendan Gleeson, Colin Farrell, and Kerry Condon are all fantastic, but Barry Keoghan also makes a fantastic character out of Dominic, who could have been mere comedic relief in the hands of a lesser actor. His scene with Siobhan towards the end of the movie is one of the most painful rejections I've seen in a long, long time, and his timing during that scene is perfect. The way he removes his cap as he walks away, it's heartbreaking stuff. He's an odd kid, as you'd expect given his father, but you want him to find a glimmer of hope, like Siobhan does. But sadly, the Banshee collects his soul before the glimmer appears. There's a Bergman-esque existentialism in Banshees. We have the island, the silence, the bleak ending, and an eagerness to explore life's bigger questions. People are messy, relationships are messy, and the Banshees of Inisherin is a study in how we can navigate the messiness. There's not a golden rule at the end of the road, there's not one piece of wisdom that could have achieved happiness for all of our characters, and maybe that's part of the point. But McDonough gives the audience a great deal to consider, and he serves up the questions with great comedy at a satisfying pace. Banshees of Inisherin will not be anywhere near the top of the box office charts when the year ends, but it's a movie I'll remember, and I cannot wait to watch it again. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe on your way out. And if you have any thoughts on the Banshees of Inisherin, any scene or quote that had a big impact on you, leave that in the comments as well. But thanks so much for stopping by, guys. I really appreciate it. Stay safe and have a fantastic rest of your day. I will talk to you soon.